Of course, it's good to know that according to the best evidence, new variants of COVID-19 have not made the virus more deadly on an individual case level. However, increasing transmissibility of COVID-19 is extremely dangerous in and of itself. It can and it will kill more people. What's up, you scholars of enlightenment? I hope you had a great Christmas and are having a great new year, or at least as great as is possible under the current circumstances. Personally, I use the relaxing times of the holiday period to create a COVID-19 simplistic spread model and highlight some of the key aspects of this ongoing nightmare.
What year is it?
It's essentially a reproduction and extension of a similar model that featured in the Washington Post in March 2020 and demonstrated how modelling populations as bouncing balls could demonstrate how a virus called simulitis can spread exponentially and how various interventions like quarantine, social distancing and such could decrease the fraction of a population infected at any given time, flatten the curve, so to speak, and stop nations surpassing their healthcare capacity. Let me introduce you quickly to my extension.
Say hello to my little friend!
Now, this model is based on freely available GitHub code, which was produced by Roberto Kawanzi, I've probably butchered that name, and Jake Vanderplas. I will include links to their socials and the GitHub code in the comment section below or the description below. The rules of the model are as follows. Whenever a sick person comes into contact with a healthy person, the healthy person becomes sick too. The probability of this can be tailored, which we'll see later. After a certain amount of time, a sick individual recovers and is assumed to no longer be able to transmit simulitis to a healthy person, nor become sick again. So here's a population of 200 people being simulated, with those people starting at random positions and moving in random directions. Initially, one person is sick, but the virus spreads rapidly because as more people become infected, they can infect even more people. Those more people can infect even more people, and so on and so forth. There is essentially a chain reaction of infection where the rate of new infections depends on the number of those already infected. This is an exponential increase in infections, an exponential spread. Large fractions of the population become infected very rapidly, and healthcare capacities can be overwhelmed. You might remember the flatten the curve messaging from early in the pandemic, when politicians and doctors noted that hand washing, social distancing, quarantine and other measures could slow the exponential spread of the virus, keep the infection peak low and save lives. Indeed, the Tories have brought back the old mantra from the first lockdown: stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. Now, of course, this model is no good for creating precise, quantitative predictions about a virus like COVID-19 in the real world. In that way, it's very much like a UK SAGE model.
He's right, you know.
About the art?
About everything, damn it!
It's very simplistic. The timescales used for various changes and interactions are quite arbitrary. There's no age delineation. People don't tend to move around in random directions unless they're part of the Leeds United defence. There's a million other shortcomings. It's not a good quantitative model. However, and without taking any political side on the pandemic interventions and strategies, the model can be used to illustrate some very important features of COVID-19 and its spread and the current pandemic in a simple and rather visually striking manner. For example, we've already seen how viruses can spread exponentially. As George Box put it, essentially all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And I hope this one will be useful to highlight some of the issues and ideas behind this pandemic. So, in this particular video, I want to quickly address the danger posed by newly identified variants of COVID-19, particularly in the UK and South Africa.
South Africa?
I'm from Rhodesia.
That seemingly spread more easily or have what we call higher transmissibility. For a bit of background, I read from The Atlantic. A new variant of the COVID-19 or coronavirus is spreading across the globe. It was first identified in the United Kingdom, where it is spreading rapidly, and has been found in multiple countries. Viruses mutate all the time, often with no impact, but this one appears to be more transmissible than other viruses, meaning that it spreads more easily. Now, there are still a lot of unknowns about this new variant or these new variants, but much concern has focused on whether this new variant or these new variants would throw off vaccine efficacy or cause more severe disease, with some degree of relief after initial study indicated that they don't do either. So vaccines should still work, and the new variants don't tend to be more deadly or cause more severe disease from initial studies. So no big problem, right? Well, unfortunately not, because increases in transmissibility of a virus could actually be far more deadly than similar-sized increases in lethality. Because higher transmissibility subjects us to more contagious virus spreading with exponential growth, as we saw previously. Whereas the risk from increased severity or lethality of a virus would only increase deaths linearly, affecting only those who are already infected. To illustrate the problem, let's go back to our simplistic population model. Consider the situation where we again start with one infected person and 199 healthy individuals. In interactions between sick individuals and healthy individuals, there's a certain probability that the infected person will pass the infection to the healthy person. In our previous example that I showed you, this probability was 100%. Every interaction between a sick person and a healthy person passed on the virus to the healthy person. But in the model, I can tailor that probability. Put another way, the transmissibility of my simulitis virus can be tailored to anything that I like. In this initial simulation, I have set the probability that a sick person passes on the virus to a healthy person in a given interaction to 7.5%. So on average, 1 in about every 13 interactions between a sick person and a healthy person passes on the virus. In the simulation, the virus spread is reasonably contained and the infection peak is kept relatively low. The population catches the virus slowly and over a protracted period of time. However, if I increase the probability of transmission in an individual case by a relatively modest amount to 12.5%, so that means that about 1 in 8 interactions passes on the virus, we see that the virus spreads much more rapidly, infects the vast majority of the population in a far shorter time frame, and displays a much higher infection peak that could begin to challenge healthcare capacity. So small changes in transmissibility of the virus can have huge impacts on spread. Now, of course, one simulation could be a fluke. So like any good scientist, I repeated the experiment. I looped over a number of transmission probabilities, repeating the simulation 100 times for each and taking averages. Having done that, here is a plot of the fraction of the population of my 200 people that got infected by my simulators virus against transmission probability. As you can see from this plot, small increases in virus transmissibility can lead to huge increases in virus spread, and therefore huge increases in the numbers of illnesses and therefore correlated deaths. That's because the increased transmissibility of a virus compounds exponentially. With a greater probability of virus spread, more people become infected, and those people in turn pass the virus on to even more people, and so on and so forth. Transmissibility is a huge problem in and of itself, and it can be far more important than virus lethality, which only increases illnesses and deaths linearly. It should be noted that the plot only begins to slow down at the top end of transmission probabilities because we have a small, finite population in this model. Essentially, there's no one left to infect. To really drive this point home and bring things into the real world with COVID-19 and really understand the difference between an exponential and a linear risk factor, we can consider an example put forward by Adam Kucharski, who's a professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Kucharski shows that a SARS-CoV variant that is 50% more transmissible would in general be a much bigger problem than a variant that's 50% more deadly, because that more transmissible variant would lead to far more deaths. He does this by calculating the expected number of deaths from a virus every month. So, how do we do that? Well, as an example, let's assume that we have a current R of 1.1. That means that every sick person passes on their infection to 1.1 healthy people on average. And let's say they do this once every 6 days. That's 5 times every month. Now let's assume that we have an infection fatality risk of 0.8%. So of everyone who catches this virus, COVID-19, 0.8% die. Now let's further assume that we have a population of about 10,000 people to keep the number simple. This is similar to a small European city. How do we calculate the expected number of monthly fatalities? Well, the calculation is actually very simple. We take the population of 10,000, we multiply it by the R of 1.1 raised to the power 5, and then we multiply by the fatality risk of 0.8%. That leaves us expecting 129 fatalities every single month. So what happens if we increase the fatality by 50%? Well, we'd simply expect that one number, that 0.8%, in our calculation changes to now be 1.2%. So we'd expect 193 fatalities per month. That's a reasonable increase from 129. But now what happens if we increase the transmissibility by 50%? It enters differently into our equation. It enters in the exponential portion. We now pick up another factor of 1.5. And if we include it, we now expect monthly fatalities of 978. That's a massive increase from a 50% increase in transmissibility. So this is just an illustrative example, as Kucharski notes, but the key message is that an increase in something that grows exponentially, like transmission, can have far more impact and effect than the same proportional increase in something that just scales linearly in outcome, like severity or fatality. It's also worth noting that because increased transmissibility compounds exponentially and levels of infection grow rapidly, infection peaks are also likely to be far higher for more transmissible viruses. And that puts a lot more pressure on healthcare capacities, and they're more likely to be surpassed and threatened. The following plot shows the infection peak as a function of transmission probability during a single interaction in my simulitis model. It's again very clear that small increases in virus transmissibility can very rapidly put severe pressure on healthcare capacities. Increased transmissibility, in other words, can wreak havoc in a very, very short period of time, because large fractions of the population catch the virus at the same time and very quickly. In summary, and reading again from The Atlantic, transmission increases can very, very quickly expand the infection baseline. Each new infected person potentially infects many more people. Severity increases affect only the infected person. That infection is certainly tragic, and this new variant's lack of increase in severity or lethality thankfully means that the variant is not a bigger threat to the individual who has already become infected. But it is, however, a great threat to society because it can dramatically change the number of infected people. To put it another way, a small percentage of a very big number can easily be much, much bigger than a bigger percentage of a small number. And this worry about exponential risk factors is the background behind the closing of schools and the new national lockdown here in the UK and lockdowns elsewhere around the world. The new variant, the more transmissible variant, is playing a key role in this. So to wrap up, of course, it's good to know that according to the best evidence, new variants of COVID-19 have not made the virus more deadly on an individual case level. However, increasing transmissibility of COVID-19 is extremely dangerous in and of itself. It can and it will kill more people. In this video, I don't really want to comment on the politics and the weighing of education or freedom or other factors against infections and deaths. I just want you to realise that it's very important to accept that increasing COVID-19 transmissibility is a huge problem and one that we need to keep an eye on. In the coming weeks, I want to look at and illustrate more key ideas behind this pandemic using this model. I've added facilities to look at vaccine efficacy and transmission blocking, different recovery rates, potential reinfection, and more. So if you're interested in seeing more, put your ideas below in the comment section, and I'll see if I can find a visually striking and interesting way to explain those issues. Until next time, stay safe out there.